Hi, I'm Sarah from 7 Makes, and today I'm going to show you how to get to know your sewing machine. So if you're new to sewing, today we're going to be learning threading, the needles, a little bit about the tension, what foot you're using, some different stitches, and troubleshooting. So first I'm going to teach you how to load your bobbin. So the bobbin is a small cylindrical piece that basically holds the thread for the bottom thread on your machine. So this is the top thread and this is the bottom thread. To load the bobbin, most machines will have a little spindle here that you can set it on. So first of all, we're going to take thread from the top thread. We're going to thread it through. There's a tiny hole here in the top of the bobbin. Thread it through there, set it on, push it across to lock it into place. And what that does is it stops the machine from sewing at that point. Make sure that this is nice. So this little bit here handles the tension. So if this is nice and straight, then that's going to work really well. And then what we do is just press go. It works really well on a high speed for this one too. And we just run it until it gets full. If you're only going to be using a small amount of a certain amount of thread, if you don't have a lot of that thread, then only put a small amount of thread onto your bobbin. But this time we're going to fill it right up. Okay, so once you've got enough thread onto the bobbin, then press stop the machine, snip it off. I always snip it quite close to the bobbin so as not to waste any thread. And then we'll set it inside. Follow the machine's instructions as to how to put the thread. A lot of them have little arrows that you can see where to go, and pop the lid back on and you're ready to go. So now we're going to thread the top thread of the machine. We'll put the thread on, and then this guy goes on just to stop it pulling off. Now, every machine's different, but they all have instructions on them. Even older models will have arrows telling you what direction the thread needs to go in, and it absolutely needs to go in this direction so that the tension is correct and the thread's picked up properly. What we'll do is we'll follow the arrows all the way around. What's really important here is to make sure that your needle is up in the highest position, and so this part here, which you're hooking the thread around, is high up, and that means that you're able to hook it on. I can open my machine here and you can see as well what happens inside is that it goes up, round down here. There's a little spring here on most machines which will go up and down, and that will help with the tension of the thread as well. Ties round here, goes round here, and then some modern machines, a lot of modern machines will have an automatic needle threader function, which is absolutely fantastic. So I'll show you that. They generally have a little hook, and then here is a little bit to wrap your thread around. And then as you lift that, it pulls the thread through the eye of the needle, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, obviously, if you don't have that, we can do it by hand. And this is where it takes a little bit of trickiness, and definitely one for the close glasses. There we go, that's it through. And we pull it down, making sure that it doesn't get caught up in anything or tied in a knot. Brought underneath the presser foot and off. So now we're going to put the needle into the machine. Always get the best quality ones that you can afford. It'll work really well with your highest quality threads that you can afford, but also it's just better for your machine as well. I use Schmetz needles, and they come in a variety of different sizes and different types for different fabrics and different threads and different materials and things like that. There's a really good graphic which we'll put in the show notes as well. So the anatomy of the needle, basically you have the point, then you have a hole with which the thread goes through, And then up at the top, there is a flat bit. The flat bit always goes to the back of your machine. So that's a really good thing to hold your finger against when you're putting it into the machine. And then what we'll do is we will find the little hole. Now what I do is I have always at least one nail, which is a little bit longer than the others. And I'll use that nail to bring the needle up as far as it will go. And then I just use my hand to tighten this little bolt, which keeps the needle in place. So I don't use, most of the little bolts come with a screwdriver. I don't tend to use it. My fingers are strong enough to be able to do it, and it also means that I can change the needle easily enough. So as long as it's tight enough that the needle's not going to come out when you're sewing, then that's fine. If you want to use your screwdriver, that's also fine too. Most sewing machines come with a variety of different feet, and this is the foot here, which is the bit that is between the needle and the fabric. So the fabric sits underneath it, and the foot manages where the fabric is going and has a space for the needle to go through it. This is a regular foot. This is a zipper foot. So as you can see, there's room for the needle to be a lot closer to the edge of something. As you can see, it sits up against the zipper, which allows the needle to go into that tiny little space, which means that you can run it along there and get a stitch really close to the zip. Then we have buttonhole foot as well, so they can look different depending on what your machine is. This is quite a basic one, and this is quite an advanced one. As you can see, this one's a bit bigger than the other one, and it has room for the button in it. So this will automatically make your buttonhole the right size for the button that you're going to be sewing on. And then after that, what you're going to need is a button sewing foot, and that holds the button and keeps everything in place while you're sewing back and forth, putting a button into the fabric. There are probably tens of other different kinds of feet that you can get for your machine. Here are some of the options that I have. To be honest, I rarely use anything other than these guys. And for everything that we're going to be doing at the moment, we're just going to be using our irregular foot. So how this fits into the machine is there is this upright here, and there is a little semicircular clampy bit, let's say, that sits into this bar here. And what we'll do is we slide that underneath, and either we use a lever to drop it down, or depending on your machine, what you might do is push it up. Now, some machines also have this bar heading towards the front, so you're pushing your foot back into that clamp. So it's either going to be facing downwards or facing forwards towards you. I said I was going to talk about tension. Tension's a funny one, and everybody I know who sews doesn't mess with it. So generally there will be a tension setting on your machine. Keep it in the middle for whatever. If you look at the manual that comes with your machine, there will be information about different tension settings for different thicknesses of material, sometimes even for different needle sizes and threads. I always tend to keep mine at 4. You will know if something's going wrong with your tension because it'll be looser on the underside, like the threads will be looser on the underside or on the top. If they're not, don't mess with it. You can see here that I can only see the turquoise thread, which is the bottom thread. On top, I can see the black thread with a tiny little bit of the turquoise thread. So that means that the tension is slightly off. Now, if I'm using thicker materials, which we will be in my other videos, then it'll probably be fine for that. But you shouldn't be able to see the bottom thread coming through on the top or the top thread coming through in the bottom for the tension to be correct. So it might be that I need to move the dial a little bit, try it again, and move the dial another way a little bit to try it again as well. I use it so little that I cannot ever remember if a higher number is tighter or looser. But again, that will be in the manual that comes with your machine. And if not, Google it. It rarely goes wrong for me. What I find is it's more likely if something isn't right that your needle is blunt and needs changed. The bobbin thread hasn't got the right tension on it, so hasn't been wound properly, or it needs cleaned inside your machine. First things first, check your needle. You will know if your needle needs changed because, if I just show you, you go like this and you can't feel anything and you're rotating it round, it's absolutely smooth. When your needle needs changed, there will be a little hook on it, almost like a tiny, tiny crochet hook. And you'll be able to feel that. So it'll basically catch on you as you're pulling your fingers down along the shaft of the needle. Change your needles regularly, probably more regularly than you might think necessary. 1 per project is what I've heard, but also what's a project? Just keep an eye on them and use the best quality threads that you can afford. I always go for Gutermann if I can afford them. Higher quality threads are less likely to fray and less likely to be fluffy. Fluffy threads will cause your needle problems and they'll cause your machine problems. So it's a good investment in the long run. What we're going to do is we're going to set the material underneath the presser foot. Now what you can see is here there are a lot of different seam allowances. A seam allowance is basically the amount of space between your line of stitching and the edge of the fabric. So there's measurements on most machines and little guidelines as well. So what you can do is set it down. I tend to line it up with the edge of my foot, especially when I'm using this kind of foot, just a regular one, and I'll set it down. And then what you can do is have an idea of how far the edge of the fabric is from any of the guide points and just keep it there as the machine feeds it through. Speaking of feeding it through, what's going to happen here is these feed dogs, they're little grippy guys which are underneath the plate. As the needle goes up and down, they come up and down and they are responsible for pulling the fabric through. So you do not need to push the fabric through. It will pull itself. So we'll set it up, we'll put our fabric underneath, and then most machines have a little lever either at the side or at the back where you can drop the foot down. Try and remember to do this every time or else you'll end up with very loose stitches, and that won't be anything to do with the tension. That'll just be because the foot is down and keeps everything in place. So once we're ready to go, we'll start quite slow and then we'll just head. And if you're looking a couple of inches away, making sure that you're keeping the fabric the same distance away, that will make sure that the stitch stays nice and straight. And there you go, you've sewn a straight line. So I have a different coloured top thread and bottom thread. It lets you see what's happening there. And that's, we're sewing. So now we've mastered a straight stitch, we're going to do a zigzag stitch. Select that function on your machine. There should be options for different stitch width and stitch length. So with the zigzag stitch, this is great because it really allows for having a really, really tight zigzag or quite a loose one. It can be wider or it can be thinner as well. So it's a really practical stitch, and we'll definitely use it in some of my videos as well. I'm going to put this in the middle just because I already have 2 straight lines on here and we've got straight stitch, and I'm just going to go with the general settings originally, and then what we'll do is we'll do another run of zigzags with different settings for length and width. Okay, so we're going to start, and as you can see here, there's a real width in the presser foot. in the hole where the needle goes in the presser foot, which allows the needle to move from side to side as it sews. Okay. There you go. I'm going to make the stitch length shorter. So what will happen here is my zigzag will be wider, but it will be closer together. Set it down, and you can see the needles over at one side for a zigzag stitch. It'll either be on the left or on the right, so bear that in mind. There's a little channel in the middle of your presser foot where it's pretty much where the center of your stitch is going to be, so your zigzag will zig and zag either side of that line. I am very lucky to have got a new machine a few years ago, and it had a whole load of new functions that I had never used before, and also a whole load of stitches. A variety of all of these stitches, plus these guys and these guys. So what I did was I made a stitch sampler, and I would heartily recommend this for anybody who has a machine with more than a couple of kinds of stitches. So what I did was an example of each of the kinds of stitches, and then I wrote the number beside it. So what you'll be able to see is all of the different things that you can do. I even used my buttonhole and sewed a button in as well. That's a really cute thing to have, and it's also a perfect reference for how anything is going to look if you are not sure what stitch to use. So sometimes you might sew something that shouldn't be sewn. A really handy way of unpicking the stitches is something called a seam ripper. May have a different handle, may have a very small handle, and a lot of the time you could get one with your sewing machine, but this one basically is the same as all the other ones in that it has a little ball here and a pointy bit there. So we've got a ball and a pointy bit, and then on the inside of this curve is a really sharp blade, I guess. So that little curve there is where your stitches go, and you're going to be basically ripping through the stitches with the sharp bit here. One thing I would say is the ball goes into the fabric and the point goes on top. So a lot of people will use it the other way around with the point inside the fabric. What happens then is it's more likely to get caught inside the fabric. So imagine this is the top and this is the inside. So top bit here near the hem, and the inside, which is basically the other side of the stitch line. So you want to put your ball to the bottom, set it right in there, and then you should be able to just pull it. You can anchor it down, it's really handy as well, and you can just pull. So you can see here it's come through the fabric, but that's not so important because it's on the hem side. Come here, and then you anchor it down, and then you'll be able to just pull through and rip through the stitches. And as that happens, there you go. You can see that's happening there, and you can do it individually. And if you want to use this pointy bit, it's really handy to find it if you're going to do them individually. But if you're actually just going to be ripping through, then ball to the bottom, pointy bit to the top, and that's your stitches ripped through. And then you can just pull any excess threads out of the fabric and you're good to go again. Depending on what kind of materials and what kind of threads you're using, fluff will build up a lot quicker in some instances than others. So I use a lot of toweling and a lot of fibrous materials, which generates quite a lot of dust and fluff. Lightly brush around the machine wherever you can, and you'll find everything works a little bit more smoothly. Okay, so let's talk about some handy things to have in your sewing machine or around your sewing machine. Snips. So a small pair of scissors or a pair of snips like these are really, really handy just for cutting off loose threads and making sure that everything looks as neat and tidy as possible. So when you finish a project, you might want to just clean off any loose threads. It makes it look as professional as possible as well. Sometimes if you've had to change thread halfway along a seam or something like that, there will be a little bit extra. So they're really, really handy, and I always have them just at my right hand. Next up, even professional sewers end up with pins or needles or rotary cutting blades penetrating the skin where they shouldn't be. So I always have a collection of plasters in the little drawer in the front of my sewing machine. So that's a real go-to. Next of all, scissors. Let's talk about scissors. Fabric scissors, I think, are the same as hairdresser's scissors, should only ever be used for that. And you do not lend them to anybody. Do not cut paper with your fabric scissors, and they should have a lovely sound to them when they are cutting the fabric and keep them sharp. I love these because they're so pretty, but they're only for fabric, only for fabric. That means that you'll get a lovely, nice, clean line when you're using it. Saying that, I use my scissors for a lot of things, but when I'm cutting fabrics, because I'm mostly cutting straight lines, I will use rotary cutters. With obviously a cutting mat as well and a ruler. The way the rotary cutters work is there is a little blade here which comes out, and I'm not going to actually put my finger at the edge of it, but as it rolls over the fabric, it can cut through it. So you need to push down into the cutting mat and into the fabric, and it'll cut through it. And you can get through a few layers at a time with this. It's really handy. But super good to use up against the edge of a ruler or any kind of grid like that. There's also a lock function on it, which means that it keeps it safe and it stops the blade from coming out. They come in a variety of different sizes. I have about 3 or 4. I've got bigger than this. I've got this one, and then I've got a really small one, which I use for really delicate stuff and curves and things like that as well. With these ones, they don't have the same handle, but they have a little guard which you pull down to allow access to the blade. So I hope this has given you a bit of confidence and you are ready to get sewing. If you have any questions, pop them in the comments. Every machine is different. They have their own personalities, their own moods. Get to know it, read the manual, play around with it, have fun and be creative. Don't forget to subscribe because there will be lots of other projects coming up. Thank you for watching. And a big thank you to the Tackling Textiles Fund from Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful, which allowed all of these videos to happen.